The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Pam Richardson adjusted her designer suit jacket. At 42, she had built her reputation as one of the city's most ruthless defense attorneys. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her blue eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had never lost a case that mattered to her career. Across the plaza, Amadou Traoré walked slowly toward the same building. His dark skin bore the weight of sleepless nights, and his worn jacket told the story of a man who had spent every dollar he had on legal fees. At 38, he had been fighting the system for 3 years, ever since his younger brother Moussa was killed during a routine traffic stop that went horribly wrong. The two had never met, but their paths were about to cross in ways neither could imagine. Pam was representing Officer Derek Matthews, the man who had shot Moussa Traoré 3 times in what he claimed was self-defense. The case had gained national attention, with protests filling the streets and families torn apart by different versions of the truth. For Pam, it was just another case, another victory to add to her impressive record. She had studied every detail, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. Her strategy was simple: create doubt about what really happened that night. She had done it before with cases just like this one. The system worked for those who knew how to use it, and Pam had mastered that game long ago. Amadou, meanwhile, had become the unwilling face of a movement. Community leaders had rallied around his family's story, organizing marches and demanding justice for Moussa. But Amadou never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted the truth to come out and for his brother's death to mean something. He had spent countless hours with the prosecutor's office, going over the events of that terrible night. Moussa had been driving home from his job at the warehouse when Officer Matthews pulled him over for a broken taillight. What should have been a simple traffic stop escalated when Matthews claimed Moussa was reaching for something in his car. The officer fired 3 shots through the driver's side window. The only other witness was Matthews's partner, Officer Lisa Chen, who supported Matthews' version of events. But security camera footage from a nearby store showed something different. It showed Moussa's hands were visible and empty when the shots were fired. As both Pam and Amadou entered the courthouse that Monday morning, reporters crowded around them. Pam gave her usual confident smile and promised that justice would be served. She spoke about her client's distinguished service record and his commitment to protecting the community. Amadou said little to the press. He simply stated that he trusted the system to work and that the truth would speak for itself. His quiet dignity stood in sharp contrast to Pam's polished performance, but both were determined to see their version of justice prevail. The courtroom was packed with supporters from both sides. Police officers in uniform sat behind the defense table, while community activists and Moussa's family filled the rows behind the prosecution. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge Harold Washington, a veteran of 30 years on the bench, called the court to order. He had presided over many high-profile cases, but he knew this one would test every skill he had developed over his long career. As the jury was selected, Pam carefully studied each potential juror. She looked for people who would trust police officers, who would give her client the benefit of the doubt. She challenged anyone who seemed too sympathetic to the victim's family, or who had strong opinions about police misconduct. Amadou watched the process with growing unease. He could see how the system worked, how lawyers could shape the outcome before the trial even began. But he held on to hope that the evidence would be strong enough to overcome any manipulation. The opening statements would begin the next day, and both sides prepared for a battle that would determine not just the fate of Officer Matthews, but the faith that communities across the nation had in their justice system. That evening, Pam returned to her luxury apartment and reviewed her notes over a glass of expensive wine. She felt confident about the jury selection and was already planning her opening statement. For her, this was about winning, about maintaining her reputation, and about proving that the system worked for those who knew how to navigate it. Meanwhile, Amadou sat in his small apartment, looking at pictures of his brother. Moussa had been planning to start college in the fall, studying to become a teacher. He had dreams of making a difference in their community, of helping kids who grew up the way they did. Now those dreams were buried in Riverside Cemetery, and all Amadou had left was his faith that somehow justice would prevail. Neither of them knew that this case would change both their lives forever. forcing them to confront their deepest beliefs about right and wrong, about power and privilege, and about what justice really means in America. The second day of trial began with opening statements, and the courtroom was even more crowded than before. News vans lined the street outside, and protesters held signs demanding justice for Moussa Traoré. District Attorney Sarah Collins stood before the jury with quiet confidence. She was a woman in her 50s who had built her career on holding powerful people accountable. Her opening was methodical and clear, laying out the timeline of events that led to Moussa's death. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about a young man whose life was cut short by excessive force. Moussa Traoré was 25 years old. He worked 2 jobs to support his family and was planning to start college. On the night of March 15th, he was driving home from work when Officer Derek Matthews pulled him over for a broken taillight. Within 2 minutes, Moussa was dead." She walked the jury through the evidence methodically. The security camera footage that showed Moussa's hands were visible when he was shot. The fact that no weapon was found in his car. The witness statements from people who lived nearby and heard the confrontation escalate. When it was Pam's turn, she stood with the poise of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her voice was clear and confident as she painted a different picture of that night. Members of the jury, Officer Derek Matthews is a decorated police officer with 12 years of exemplary service. On the night in question, he was doing his job, protecting our community from danger. When he approached Mr. Traoré's vehicle, he feared for his life based on the suspect's erratic behavior and apparent attempt to reach for something in the car. Pam had crafted her narrative carefully. She focused on Matthews' split-second decision, on the dangers police officers face every day, and on the reasonable doubt that existed about what really happened in those crucial moments. But as she spoke, she noticed something that bothered her. Amadou Traoré sat in the front row, listening to every word with an expression of quiet pain. He didn't show anger or hatred toward her, just deep sadness. For a moment, it threw off her rhythm. The first witness was Officer Lisa Chen, Matthews' partner that night. She testified that she saw Moussa make sudden movements inside the car and that Matthews called out warnings before firing. Under direct examination by Pam, her testimony seemed solid and supportive of the defense. But during cross-examination, District Attorney Collins exposed some inconsistencies. Chen's written report immediately after the incident mentioned only one warning shout, but her testimony mentioned multiple warnings. She also couldn't explain why she didn't fire her own weapon if the threat was so immediate. "Officer Chen," Collins asked, "you've known Officer Matthews for 5 years, is that correct?" "Yes, ma'am. Would you consider him a friend?" Chen hesitated. "We're colleagues. We trust each other with our lives." "And you understand that Officer Matthews could face serious prison time if convicted?" "I understand the charges, yes." "So you have a personal interest in the outcome of this case?" Pam objected, and Judge Washington sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury could see that Chen's testimony might be influenced by loyalty to her partner. That afternoon, the prosecution called Dr. Marcus Webb, the medical examiner who performed Moussa's autopsy. His testimony was clinical but devastating. 3 gunshot wounds, all fired from outside the vehicle. The trajectory of the bullets showed that Moussa was sitting normally in his seat, not lunging forward or reaching for anything. Pam cross-examined Dr. Webb aggressively, trying to create doubt about his conclusions. She suggested that the body could have moved after being shot, that the angle of the bullets didn't tell the complete story. But the doctor's expertise was solid, and his testimony stood up to her attacks. During a recess, Pam found herself in the courthouse bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in years, she felt uncertain about a case. Usually, she could find enough holes in the prosecution's case to create reasonable doubt. But the evidence against Matthews was stronger than she had expected. She thought about her conversation with Matthews during case preparation. He had seemed nervous, changing small details of his story when pressed. When she asked him directly if he had made a mistake that night, he had paused too long before saying no. Meanwhile, Amadou spent the recess outside the courthouse, talking quietly with his mother and sister. They were struggling to relive the details of Moussa's death, but they knew this was their only chance for justice. "How can she defend him?" his sister Fatima asked, tears in her eyes. "She knows what he did was wrong." Amadou looked through the courthouse windows and saw Pam Richardson talking with her client. "She's doing her job," he said quietly, "but I don't think she believes everything she's saying." The day ended with testimony from Mrs. Gloria Martinez, who lived in an apartment overlooking the intersection where the shooting occurred. She had been awakened by shouting and looked out her window just as the shots were fired. Her testimony was simple but powerful. "I saw the police car's lights flashing," she said. "I heard the officer yelling, but I couldn't make out the words. Then I heard 3 quick shots. The young man never got out of his car. He never even opened his door." During cross-examination, Pam tried to discredit Mrs. Martinez's testimony by questioning her eyesight and the lighting conditions that night. But the elderly woman remained calm and consistent, insisting she saw what she saw. As court adjourned for the day, Pam gathered her papers with less confidence than she had felt that morning. The prosecution's case was stronger than she had anticipated, and she was beginning to realize that her usual tactics might not be enough this time. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded both legal teams. Pam gave her standard response about having faith in the jury system and looking forward to presenting the defense's case. But privately, she was already thinking about how to advise Matthews about a possible plea deal. Amadou spoke briefly to the press, thanking the witnesses for their courage in coming forward. "The truth is coming out," he said simply. "That's all we ever wanted." That night, both Pam and Amadou lay awake thinking about the day's testimony. For Pam, it was the beginning of doubt about a case she had thought she could win easily. For Amadou, it was the first glimmer of hope that justice might actually be possible. The third day of trial brought the most anticipated witness, the security camera footage from Ramirez Corner Store. The grainy black-and-white video showed the intersection where Moussa Traoré died, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward as it played on the large monitors. District Attorney Collins narrated the footage carefully. At 11:47 p.m., Moussa's Honda Civic appeared on screen, driving slowly through the intersection. 20 seconds later, Officer Matthews' patrol car followed with lights flashing. The traffic stop occurred just at the edge of the camera's range, but the crucial moments were visible. The video showed Moussa's car stopped on the shoulder. Matthews approached from the driver's side while Officer Chen remained by their patrol car. For 90 seconds, everything appeared normal. Then Matthews suddenly stepped back and drew his weapon. "Watch carefully," Collins told the jury. "You can see Mr. Traoré's hands through the driver's side window. They remain on the steering wheel throughout the encounter." The footage showed Matthews pointing his gun at the car for several seconds before firing 3 rapid shots. Moussa's body slumped forward and his hands never left the steering wheel. The courtroom was silent except for quiet sobs from Moussa's family. Even some of the police officers sitting behind Matthews looked uncomfortable watching the footage. Pam knew this was the most damaging evidence against her client, but she had prepared for this moment. During her cross-examination of the video technician who enhanced the footage, she attacked the quality of the recording. "The video is quite dark, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes, it was taken at night with standard security equipment. And the resolution makes it difficult to see fine details?" "Some details, yes." "Could you definitively say that Mr. Traoré wasn't reaching for something below the window line?" The technician hesitated. "The footage shows his hands on the steering wheel, but I can't see every movement below the dashboard." It was a small victory for the defense, but Pam could see from the jury's faces that the video had made a powerful impression. After the morning session, Pam met with Officer Matthews in a private conference room. For the first time since taking the case, she asked him the question she had been avoiding. "Derek, I need you to tell me exactly what happened that night. Not what you wrote in your report, not what you told Internal Affairs. What really happened?" Matthews looked tired and older than his 34 years. He had been on paid administrative leave for 8 months, and the stress was showing. His marriage was falling apart, and he had been drinking too much. "I was scared," he said quietly. "Not of him specifically, but of everything. We'd had 3 officer-involved shootings in 6 months. The community was angry. Every traffic stop felt dangerous." Pam set down her pen. "Derek, that's not an answer. Did Moussa Traoré pose an immediate threat to your life?" Matthews stared at his hands for a long moment. He moved suddenly. I thought he was reaching for something. But when I think about it now, really think about it, he might have just been trying to get his license out of his wallet." The admission hung in the air between them. Pam felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a doubt about whether she was doing the right thing by defending this man. The video shows his hands on the steering wheel, she said. I know what the video shows, Matthews replied, but in that moment I was terrified. I had less than 2 seconds to make a decision. I chose wrong. That afternoon, the defense began presenting its case. Pam called several character witnesses for Matthews, including his training sergeant and community members he had helped over the years. She was trying to show the jury that he was a good man who made a mistake under pressure, not a racist killer. But as she listened to the witnesses describe Matthews's good deeds, Pam found herself thinking about Amadou Traoré sitting in the front row. What about his brother's character? What about Musa's dreams of becoming a teacher? His plans for college, his family who loved him? The defense's key witness was Dr. Amanda Foster, a police psychology expert who testified about the split-second decisions officers must make in dangerous situations. She explained how stress and adrenaline could affect perception and judgment. Officer Matthews had to assess a potential threat in less than 2 seconds, Dr. Foster explained. Under those conditions, even a trained officer can misinterpret innocent actions as threatening. During cross-examination, District Attorney Collins challenged Dr. Foster's conclusions. Dr. Foster, nothing in your analysis changes the fact that Mr. Traoré was unarmed, is that correct? That's correct. And nothing in your testimony explains why Officer Matthews fired 3 shots instead of 1. Multiple shots are standard training when an officer perceives a lethal threat. But if the threat wasn't real, then multiple shots just meant multiple opportunities to preserve a life that was unnecessarily taken. Isn't that true? Pam objected, and Judge Washington sustained it. But again, the damage was done. That evening, Pam sat in her office reviewing the case files. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something she hadn't felt in her legal career: genuine conflict about what she was doing. She thought about her law school ideals, about justice being blind and everyone deserving a vigorous defense. But she also thought about the video footage, about Matthew's admission, about the family that would never see Musa graduate from college. Meanwhile, Amadou was at home with his extended family, preparing for his own testimony the next day. His mother had been crying on and off since watching the security video in court. I keep seeing it over and over, she said. My baby boy just sitting there, and then Amadou held his mother's hand. We're going to get justice, Mama. The truth is finally coming out. But even as he said the words, Amadou wondered if truth and justice were the same thing. He had seen how the legal system worked, how lawyers could twist facts and create doubt even when the evidence was clear. His sister Fatima joined them at the kitchen table. What if the jury believes her? She asked. What if they think Derek Matthews was just doing his job? Amadou looked at a framed photo of Musa on the wall, his graduation picture from high school full of hope and promise. Then we'll know that Pam Richardson was right, he said quietly. Justice doesn't exist without people like us fighting for it. The next day would bring closing arguments, and both sides would make their final appeals to the jury. But already the case had changed everyone involved in ways they were just beginning to understand. Pam Richardson, who had built her career on winning at any cost, was beginning to question whether some victories came at too high a price. And Amadou Traoré, who had started this journey seeking justice for his brother, was learning that justice and truth were more complicated than he had ever imagined. The 4th day of trial began with Amadou Traoré taking the witness stand. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and overflow seating set up in adjacent rooms. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the victim's brother speaking for the dead. District Attorney Collins approached the witness stand gently, knowing that Amadou's testimony would be the emotional heart of the prosecution's case. She began by asking him to tell the jury about his brother. Musa was everything I wasn't, Amadou said, his voice steady despite his obvious emotion. He was the smart one, the one with plans. While I was getting into trouble as a teenager, Musa was tutoring other kids in math. He worked at the warehouse during the day and took night classes at the community college. Amadou described his brother's dreams of becoming a teacher, his girlfriend of 3 years, his plans to transfer to the state university. He painted a picture of a young man full of hope and ambition, someone who wanted to give back to his community. The night he died, he had just gotten off work. He was tired, looking forward to coming home and studying for his algebra final. He texted me at 11:30 saying he'd be home in 20 minutes. Amadou's voice broke slightly. He never made it. Pam watched Amadou testify and felt something unexpected, admiration for his dignity and composure. She had seen many victim impact statements over the years, but there was something different about this man. He wasn't seeking revenge or crying for blood. He just wanted people to remember his brother as a person, not a statistic. When it came time for cross-examination, Pam faced a dilemma she had never encountered before. Her usual strategy would be to find ways to discredit the witness or raise questions about the victim's character. But looking at Amadou, she couldn't bring herself to attack a man who had already lost so much. "Mr. Traoré," she began carefully, "I want you to know that I'm sorry for your loss. No one should have to bury their younger brother." The courtroom stirred. This wasn't the aggressive cross-examination everyone expected. "I only have a few questions," Pam continued. "You weren't present on the night of March 15th, correct?" "That's correct. So your testimony today is about your brother's character, not about what happened during the traffic stop." "Yes, ma'am." "You loved your brother very much." "Yes, I did." "And you want justice for him?" Amadou looked directly at Pam. "I want the truth, ma'am. Whatever that means for justice." Pam nodded and sat down. Her cross-examination had lasted less than 5 minutes, and her colleagues in the defense bar would later criticize her for not being more aggressive. But something inside her had shifted. During the lunch recess, Pam found herself alone in the courthouse cafeteria, staring at a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. District Attorney Collins approached and sat across from her. "That was unexpected," Collins said. "What was your cross-examination, or lack thereof?" Pam looked up from her coffee. "He was telling the truth about his brother. What was I supposed to attack?" Collins studied her opponent. "Pam, I've known you for 15 years. You've never passed up a chance to create doubt about a witness, regardless of the circumstances. Maybe I'm getting soft in my old age. Or maybe you're finally seeing this case for what it really is." That afternoon, both sides presented their closing arguments. District Attorney Collins went first, walking the jury through the evidence methodically. She reminded them of the security camera footage, the medical examiner's testimony, and the witnesses who saw the shooting. "Members of the jury, this case isn't complicated," she said. "Moussa Traoré was shot and killed while sitting in his car with his hands visible on the steering wheel. He was unarmed. He posed no threat to anyone. Officer Matthews used deadly force against an innocent man, and that's murder in the second degree." Collins spoke for an hour, building her case brick by brick. She addressed the defense's arguments about split-second decisions and police training, arguing that none of it justified shooting an unarmed man who was complying with orders. Then it was Pam's turn. She stood before the jury knowing that her closing argument would determine not just the outcome of the case, but how she would live with herself afterward. She began with the standard defense arguments: reasonable doubt, the dangers police officers face, the difficulty of making split-second decisions. But as she spoke, she could hear the hollowness in her own voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, Officer Matthews made a mistake," she heard herself saying. "But a mistake made in fear, in a split second under tremendous pressure, is not the same as murder." The words felt like ash in her mouth. She looked at the jury and saw skepticism in their eyes. She looked at Officer Matthews and saw a man who knew he had done wrong. She looked at Amadou Traoré and saw quiet dignity in the face of unimaginable loss. And then, in a moment that would define the rest of her career, Pam Richardson did something she had never done before. She stopped reading from her prepared notes and spoke from her heart. "I've been a defense attorney for 18 years, she said quietly. "I've built my career on creating reasonable doubt, on finding flaws in the prosecution's case, on getting my clients acquitted regardless of the evidence against them." The courtroom was dead silent. Even Judge Washington looked surprised. "But sometimes," Pam continued, "the evidence is so clear, the truth so obvious, that no amount of legal maneuvering can change what really happened. Moussa Traoré was an innocent man who was killed while sitting in his car. The video shows it. The witnesses confirm it. Even my client in his honest moments knows it." Matthews stared at his attorney in shock. The prosecutor's table looked stunned. In the gallery, Amadou Traoré leaned forward, not quite believing what he was hearing. I could spend the next hour trying to convince you that black is white, that up is down, that an unarmed man sitting in his car was somehow a mortal threat to a trained police officer. I could create enough doubt in your minds to get my client acquitted. But I won't do that. Not this time. Pam looked directly at the jury. Officer Derek Matthews shot and killed Moussa Traoré without justification. That's the truth, and the truth is what matters, not whether I can win another case. She sat down to complete silence. Judge Washington called for a recess during which the defense team erupted in chaos. Matthews demanded a mistrial and threatened to fire Pam immediately. Other attorneys warned her that she had just committed professional suicide. But as the courthouse emptied for the day, Amadou Traoré approached Pam in the hallway. The two had never spoken directly before this moment. "Mrs. Richardson," he said quietly. Pam turned to face him, expecting anger or accusations. "Thank you," Amadou said simply.
"Thank you for telling the truth." Pam felt tears in her eyes for the first time in years.
"I'm sorry it took me so long to find it." That night, Pam sat in her apartment knowing that her career as she had known it was over. But for the first time in years, she felt at peace with herself. She had finally remembered why she had become a lawyer in the first place. The courthouse was in chaos the morning after Pam's unexpected closing argument. News outlets across the country were running the story of the defense attorney who essentially convicted her own client. Legal experts were debating whether she had committed malpractice or performed the highest duty of an officer of the court. Judge Washington called an emergency hearing before the jury returned with their verdict. Officer Matthews had indeed fired Pam overnight and demanded a mistrial based on ineffective assistance of counsel. His new attorney, a high-powered criminal defense specialist named Robert Kane, argued that Pam's closing argument had denied Matthews his constitutional right to adequate representation. "Your Honor," Kane argued, "my client was essentially convicted by his own attorney in front of the jury. This is the most egregious case of ineffective assistance I've encountered in 20 years of practice." District Attorney Collins opposed the motion. "Your Honor, Ms. Richardson provided zealous advocacy within the bounds of professional ethics. She presented evidence, cross-examined witnesses, and made legal arguments. Her closing argument was unorthodox, but it wasn't legally deficient." Judge Washington faced an unprecedented situation. He had presided over thousands of cases, but never one where a defense attorney had so dramatically abandoned her client's interests in open court. Pam sat alone at the defense table, no longer representing anyone. She had been effectively fired, but she requested permission to address the court. "Your Honor, I understand the unusual nature of my closing argument yesterday. I've spent the night reviewing my ethical obligations as an attorney, and I believe I acted within the bounds of professional responsibility." She pulled out a copy of the Legal Ethics Code and read aloud. "A lawyer shall not knowingly make a false statement of fact to a tribunal. A lawyer's duty to zealously advocate for their client does not override their duty to the integrity of the legal system. I could not stand before that jury and argue something I knew to be false. The evidence in this case is overwhelming. Officer Matthews shot and killed an unarmed man without justification. No amount of legal technicalities changes that fact." Judge Washington listened carefully. In his 30 years on the bench, he had seen lawyers bend the truth, manipulate evidence, and exploit loopholes. But he had rarely seen one sacrifice their career for the sake of honesty. After 2 hours of arguments, Judge Washington made his ruling. The defendant's motion for a mistrial is denied. While Ms. Richardson's closing argument was highly unusual, it did not constitute ineffective assistance of counsel. She presented a competent defense throughout the trial and made legal arguments based on the evidence presented. The judge looked directly at Pam. "Ms. Richardson, your actions yesterday were either the height of professional integrity or professional misconduct. History will be the judge of that." When court reconvened, the jury returned after only 3 hours of deliberation. The forewoman, a retired teacher named Margaret Williams, stood to read the verdict. "On the charge of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant, Derek Matthews, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Police officers behind Matthews looked stunned and angry. Community activists embraced each other and wept. Moussa's family held hands and closed their eyes in prayer. Officer Matthews showed no emotion as he was handcuffed and led away. He had been convicted and would face 25 years to life in prison. After the verdict was read, Judge Washington addressed the packed courtroom. This trial has tested our legal system in ways that go beyond the guilt or innocence of the defendant. It has forced us to confront difficult questions about justice, truth, and the role of attorneys in our society. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded everyone involved in the case. Officer Matthews' new attorney promised to appeal, claiming his client had been denied a fair trial. Police union representatives denounced the verdict and criticized the judicial system. District Attorney Collins praised the jury for their careful consideration of the evidence. Today, justice was served. A police officer who abused his authority and took an innocent life has been held accountable. Amadou Traoré stood with his family and community supporters, but his victory felt incomplete. "We're grateful for the verdict," he said to the gathered reporters. "But Musa is still gone. This doesn't bring him back. It just means that his death wasn't completely meaningless." When reporters asked about Pam Richardson's role in the conviction, Amadou was thoughtful. "Mrs. Richardson did something very difficult. She chose truth over winning. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had." Pam herself avoided the media circus, slipping out a back entrance of the courthouse. But the story followed her home. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, job offers from prosecutors' offices, and threats from police supporters who viewed her as a traitor. The State Bar Association announced they would investigate whether Pam had violated her ethical obligations to her client. Some legal experts argued she should be disbarred, while others hailed her as a hero who put justice above personal gain. 3 days after the verdict, Pam received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. Amadou Traoré stood in her hallway holding a manila envelope. "Mr. Traoré," she said, surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing her the envelope. "And to talk, if you have time." Inside the envelope were dozens of photos of Musa, as a child, graduating high school, at work, with his girlfriend, with his family. Pictures of a life cut short, but also of a life fully lived in its brief span. "I wanted you to see who he was," Amadou said as they sat in Pam's living room. "Not just the victim in a court case, but the person we lost." Pam looked through the photos, seeing for the first time the full humanity of the young man whose death had changed her life. "He looked happy," she said softly. "He was. Musa believed in people, believed in the system, believed that if you worked hard and did right, good things would happen." Amadou's voice was heavy with loss. "Maybe that's naive, but it's who he was." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Amadou asked the question that had brought him there. "Why did you do it? Why did you sacrifice everything to tell the truth?" Pam considered the question that everyone had been asking her. "Because I looked at you in that courtroom, and I saw your dignity in the face of loss. I saw your brother's humanity in the photos and testimony, and I realized that I had spent 18 years of my career treating people like chess pieces instead of human beings." She set down the photos. "I became a lawyer because I believed in justice. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that justice and winning aren't always the same thing." Amadou nodded slowly. "The system failed my brother, but it worked because you made it work. That gives me hope that maybe things can change." As he prepared to leave, Amadou turned back to Pam. "What will you do now?" Pam managed a small smile. "I'm not sure. I might not be a defense attorney much longer. But whatever I do, I'll do it with integrity. Your brother taught me that in a way." After Amadou left, Pam sat alone with Musa's photos spread across her coffee table. For the first time in her career, she had lost a case and felt like she had won something far more important: her soul. 6 months after the trial, Pam Richardson's life had been turned completely upside down. The State Bar Association had concluded their investigation and issued a formal reprimand for her conduct, though they stopped short of suspension or disbarment. The ruling stated that while her actions were highly irregular and potentially prejudicial to her client, they did not rise to the level of professional misconduct that warranted more severe punishment. But the legal community's judgment was harsher than the Bar Association's. Pam found herself effectively blacklisted by defense firms across the state. Word had spread that she couldn't be trusted to put winning above everything else. Her former colleagues whispered that she had suffered some kind of breakdown during the trial. Her luxury apartment was gone, sold to pay mounting legal bills from her own ethics hearing. She now lived in a modest one-bedroom place across town, surviving on her savings and the occasional consultation fee from attorneys who needed help with research but wouldn't put her in front of a jury. The irony wasn't lost on her. In trying to serve justice, she had destroyed her ability to practice law effectively. On a cold Tuesday morning in October, Pam sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse, reviewing case files for a public defender who had hired her to help with research. The work paid barely enough to cover her rent, but it was honest work that didn't require her to compromise her newfound principles. She looked up to see Amadou Traoré approaching her table. It had been 3 months since they last spoke, and she was surprised to see him. "Mr. Traoré," she said, closing her laptop. "This is unexpected. I hope you don't mind," he said, sitting across from her. "I was in the neighborhood and saw you through the window." Amadou looked different, older somehow, wearier. The trial had taken its toll on him as well, though in different ways. He had become a reluctant spokesperson for police reform, speaking at rallies and community meetings. The attention was exhausting, and he longed for the privacy to grieve his brother in peace. "How are you managing?" he asked, gesturing to her modest surroundings. Pam smiled ruefully. "I'm learning to live on a lot less money. It's humbling, but not necessarily bad for me." "Any regrets?" The question hung between them. Pam had asked herself the same thing every day for 6 months. Had destroying her career been worth one moment of honesty? "Every morning when I wake up," she said honestly, "and every night when I go to sleep. But not during the day when I'm actually living." Amadou understood. "I know what you mean. I regret that Musa had to die for us to have this conversation. But I don't regret fighting for him." They sat quietly for a moment. Two people who had been changed by their encounter with truth and its consequences. "I have something to tell you," Amadou said finally. "The police department reached out to me last week. They want to settle the civil lawsuit. After the criminal trial, Musa's family had filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the police department and the city. It was a separate legal process that could result in monetary damages for the family. "How much are they offering?" Pam asked. $2 million. It was a significant amount, enough to change the Traoré family's financial situation permanently. Amadou's mother could stop working 2 jobs. His sister could go to college. They could move out of their struggling neighborhood. "But there's a condition," Amadou continued. "They want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I can't talk about the case, can't speak at rallies or community meetings, can't be involved in police reform efforts." Pam frowned. "They want to buy your silence, essentially, yes. They know that Musa's story has become a symbol for the reform movement. If I disappear from public view, they think the attention will fade. What are you going to do?" Amadou stared out the coffee shop window at the courthouse where their lives had intersected. 6 months ago, I would have said no immediately. Justice isn't for sale, right? But now I'm tired, Mrs. Richardson. I'm tired of being the face of other people's anger. I'm tired of having strangers approach me at the grocery store to tell me about their own experiences with police. I'm tired of reliving my brother's death every time I speak publicly." Pam could hear the exhaustion in his voice. The burden of being a symbol for social justice was wearing him down. "My mother needs medical care she can't afford," Amadou continued. "My sister wants to be a doctor, but we can't pay for her education. $2 million would solve all of those problems, but taking the money feels like betraying everything we fought for. It feels like letting the system buy me off, like proving that everything has a price." Pam recognized the moral dilemma Amadou faced. It was similar to the choice she had made during the trial: principle versus pragmatism, truth versus survival. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "What?" "I think you've already done more for justice than anyone should have to do. You stood up when it mattered most. You fought when fighting was hard. You don't owe the world your entire life." Amadou looked at her with surprise. "I thought you'd tell me to keep fighting." 6 months ago I might have, but I've learned that martyrdom is easy to recommend when it's someone else's sacrifice." Pam leaned forward. "Take care of your family, Amadou. Let someone else carry the banner for a while. What about the movement? What about police reform? The movement is bigger than any one person. Your brother's story changed things, started conversations that will continue with or without you. You've earned the right to step back and live your own life." That afternoon, Amadou walked through the neighborhood where he and Musa had grown up. He passed the corner where his brother used to wait for the school bus, the park where they played basketball. the church where they held Musa's funeral. At each familiar place, he asked himself the same question. What would Musa want him to do? By evening, he had his answer. He called the city's attorney and accepted the settlement offer, with one modification. He would take the money, but he wouldn't sign a non-disclosure agreement. He would step back from public activism, but he wouldn't be silenced if he chose to speak. The city initially rejected his counteroffer, but after a week of negotiations, they accepted. $2 million in exchange for Amadou's reduced public profile, but not his permanent silence. When the settlement was announced, some activists criticized Amadou for selling out. Others understood that he had already given more than anyone should be asked to give. Pam read about the settlement in the local newspaper while working in her small apartment. She felt proud of Amadou for making a choice that put his family first, even if it meant disappointing some supporters. Her phone rang that evening. It was Amadou. I signed the papers today, he said without preamble. How do you feel? Relieved, guilty, hopeful, confused. He paused. Human, I guess. That's the most honest thing anyone could feel, Pam replied. Mrs. Richardson? Yes, thank you. For everything. For seeing my brother as a person. For choosing truth over winning. For showing me that sometimes the right choice is also the hard choice. After they hung up, Pam sat in her quiet apartment, thinking about the path that had brought her to this moment. She had lost her career, her money, her reputation, but she had found something more valuable. The ability to look at herself in the mirror without shame. It was, she realized, a fair trade. 2 years had passed since the trial that changed everything. The Matthews case had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer tragedies and fresh outrages. Officer Derek Matthews was serving his sentence at Riverside Correctional Facility, having lost his appeal. The police department had implemented new training protocols and body camera requirements, small reforms that might prevent future tragedies. Pam Richardson now worked as a staff attorney for the City Legal Aid Society, representing poor clients who couldn't afford private lawyers. The pay was a fraction of what she had earned as a defense attorney, but the work felt meaningful in ways her old career never had. She helped families navigate the welfare system, defended tenants against illegal evictions, and advocated for people who had nowhere else to turn. Her small office was cluttered with case files and thank you cards from clients. On her desk sat a framed photo that Amadou had given her, Musa Traoré in his high school graduation gown, smiling broadly at the camera. It reminded her daily why she had chosen truth over victory. The legal community had slowly begun to forgive her supposed transgression. Younger attorneys sometimes sought her out for advice, drawn by stories of the lawyer who had sacrificed everything for principle. She had become something of a legend, though not the kind she had once aspired to be. On a warm spring morning, Pam was reviewing a case file when her assistant knocked on her door. There's someone here to see you, she said. He says it's personal. Amadou Traoré stood in her waiting room, but he looked like a different person than the grieving brother she had met during the trial. He was well dressed in a tailored suit, his posture confident and relaxed. The settlement money had clearly been put to good use. Mr. Traoré, Pam said, surprised. You look well. I feel well, he replied with a genuine smile. Better than I have in years. Can we talk? They walked to a nearby park where office workers were eating lunch on benches. Amadou had news to share. His mother's medical bills were paid. His sister was in her second year of medical school, and he had used part of the settlement to start a non-profit organization, providing scholarships to students from low-income families. I named it the Musa Traoré Education Foundation, he said. We've already helped 12 kids start college who couldn't have afforded it otherwise. That's wonderful, Pam said. Musa would be proud. I think so too. But that's not why I wanted to see you. Amadou pulled out a business card and handed it to her. It read, Traoré and Associates, Community Legal Services. I'm starting a law firm, he explained. Well, I'm funding one. I want to hire attorneys who will represent people who can't afford good legal help. People like my family was before all this happened. Pam looked at the card with curiosity. That's admirable, but I'm not sure why you're telling me. Because I want you to run it. The offer caught Pam completely off guard. She stared at Amadou, unsure if she had heard correctly. You want me to what? I want you to be the lead attorney and managing partner. You'd have complete autonomy to take whatever cases you think are important. You'd hire your own staff, set your own priorities. I'm not looking to make money from this, I want to make a difference. Pam was speechless. The offer was generous beyond anything she could have expected. Why me? She asked finally. Because you're the only lawyer I know who chose doing right over doing well. Because you understand what justice actually means, not just what it looks like in a courtroom. Amadou leaned forward on the park bench. Look, I could hire any number of attorneys who would be happy to take my money and run a legal aid clinic. But I want someone who sees clients as people, not case files. Someone who won't compromise their principles for convenience. Amadou, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person. My reputation in the legal community is complicated. Your reputation is exactly why you're the right person. Word gets around in communities like mine. People know what you did during the trial. They know you chose truth over winning. That means something. Pam thought about her current work at Legal Aid, the constant struggle for funding, the overwhelming caseload that made it impossible to give clients the attention they deserved. Amadou's offer would allow her to practice law the way she had always imagined it could be, focused on justice rather than profit. I need time to think about it, she said. Of course. Take all the time you need. That evening, Pam sat in her apartment weighing the decision. She called her mentor from law school, a professor who had inspired her to pursue law as a tool for social change. It sounds like an incredible opportunity, Professor Martinez said over the phone. But are you ready to be in charge again? To make decisions that affect other people's livelihoods? I don't know, Pam admitted. I've gotten comfortable being a foot soldier instead of a general. It's safer, less responsibility, but it's also less impact. Pam, you made one mistake in 18 years of practice. You told the truth when it was inconvenient. That's hardly a disqualifying character flaw. 2 weeks later, Pam called Amadou and accepted his offer. They spent the next 3 months planning the new firm, hiring staff, and setting up offices in a building near the courthouse where their lives had first intersected. The grand opening of Traoré and Associates was covered by local media, though the coverage focused more on the unusual partnership between the victim's brother and the attorney who had helped convict his brother's killer. During the opening reception, Pam found herself standing in front of a portrait of Moussa Traoré that hung in the lobby. Amadou joined her there. Do you think he would approve? Pam asked. I think he'd be amazed that his death led to something positive. Moussa always believed that good could come from tragedy if people were willing to work for it. Pam looked around the bustling office, filled with attorneys, paralegals, and community members celebrating the new firm. You know, when I made that closing argument 2 years ago, I thought I was ending my career. Instead, you were starting it, Amadou replied. What do you mean? Everything you did before was just practice. This is what you were meant to do. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, a young woman approached Pam. She was clearly nervous, clutching a folder of papers. Excuse me, are you Ms. Richardson? Yes, I am. My name is Maria Santos. My brother was killed by police 3 months ago. Everyone says it was justified, but I know it wasn't. I've been to 5 lawyers, and they all said I don't have a case. She held out the folder with shaking hands. Will you at least look at it? Pam took the folder and looked at Maria Santos, young, scared, seeking justice for a dead brother in a system that seemed designed to deny it to people like her. Yes, Pam said simply. I'll look at it. As Maria left with tears of relief in her eyes, Amadou smiled at Pam. And so it begins. What begins? Justice. Real justice. The kind that doesn't exist without people like us. Pam thought about the words she had once sneered in court, dismissing them as naive idealism. Now she understood what Amadou had tried to tell her that day. Justice wasn't something that existed in courtrooms and law books. It was something that people created through their choices, their courage, and their refusal to accept that wrong was right, just because it was convenient. She looked up at Moussa's portrait one more time, then walked toward her new office to review Maria Santos's case file. There was work to do, justice to serve, and truth to tell. Outside, the courthouse where it all began stood silhouetted against the evening sky, a reminder that the law was just words on paper until people decided to make it mean something more.